Okay, let's get started. So, any questions, first of all? Cool. All right, so look forward to taking a look at your work from last week. Today what we're going to do is we're going to move on. We're going to look at, we're going to start talking about JavaScript. So there's, and we're actually going to probably take a little while to talk about JavaScript as well. Of course, JavaScript is a full-blown programming language. It can be kind of nasty. JavaScript was thrown together in about a month, and basically just kind of grabbed parts from various languages and mashed them together. So yeah, it's kind of a interesting little language. Having said that, it's one of the languages these days that you really want to know. It's incredibly important. Not only because of the fact that, well, I mean, generally, if you have a browser, you can actually use it, but also because of the new technologies in HTML5. A lot of what people talk about when they talk about HTML5 are, in fact, features that you can only access through JavaScript. So, for example, take the canvas tag in HTML. The canvas tag basically represents an area that one can draw on programmatically. In other words, to really use canvas, you have to actually write some JavaScript code to have it be useful and so forth. And there are things like location APIs and various other ones. Again, you need to use JavaScript to be able to use this. The other thing with JavaScript, there's a couple more. So one is, over the years, we've gotten really, really good at executing JavaScript. And what I mean by that is, so first of all, JavaScript tends to be used in an interpreted fashion. That is basically, typically we can deal with a programming language in one of two ways. We can compile it or we can interpret it. What's the difference? Nobody's heard of a compiler. Yeah?
One of them lets you play around in a console, which I'll have to do that.
Yeah, right. Which one is that?
Not interpreted.
Yes, the interpreted, right. So interpreted languages, right, so the difference between compilers and interpreters, typically something like C++, we use a compiler for, right? So you run something like G++ or Visual Studio's compiler, etc. That chugs away on your code and then spits out an executable, okay? That is the machine language that the machine understands, right? And once you have that executable, you can move that from platform to platform, assuming they're roughly the same platform, right? So if you have a Windows executable, you can run it on other Windows machines and so forth. Interpreted languages, the idea is that we do the conversion on the fly. Okay, that is, we type in the particular language and there's a program that in real time basically interprets those instructions to the actual instructions that the machine understands. And the nice thing about using an interpreter for a language is that you have the ability to very easily test out your ideas. So like he said, the idea is typically you'll have some sort of console, some sort of REPL, etc., where you can just type in live code and immediately find out what the result is going to be. Okay? Now, if you haven't worked with a language like that, or if you haven't really used an interpreter for a language in that manner, you're missing out. Because, let's face it, as programmers, we spend a lot of time writing out test code and possibly throwing that stuff away. right? I don't know how I'm going to solve this problem. I write a little bit of code, see what that does, write a little bit more code, see what that does, etc. Right? So taking the whole compilation step out of that process certainly makes development time quicker. But as I was saying also, the engines for executing JavaScript have gotten incredibly fast. How fast? People have actually ported first-person shooters to JavaScript, and they're totally playable. Okay. So JavaScript executes very, very quickly, right? And so these days, you know, in terms of interactivity on a web page, JavaScript is sort of where it's at. Used to be, you might choose something like Java, you might choose Flash. Flash is dead. Java's still around, but Oracle was very slow to address various security issues with Java, and so Java's foothold in terms of executing in the browser, that is applets, basically has sort of slipped away. So JavaScript really kind of is the language these days in terms of client-side executable code. So much so that you'll actually even see languages that will be compiled to JavaScript. Okay. That is, you write your program in another language, you run it through a compiler, and it spits out not machine code, but JavaScript to then run within a browser. Dart is one of these, ClojureScript, etc. There are CoffeeScript, there are a handful of these languages. So JavaScript executes these days very, very quickly. It used to be the case that JavaScript was a solely client-side technology. Initially, that was the intent. It basically was developed to compete with Java and to execute on the client side, that is, in the browser. These days, if you really like JavaScript, good news. You can do all of your server-side programming in JavaScript as well. Okay? One of the most common platforms for that is something called Node. Okay, Node.js. Google that, you'll find it, etc. The other reason why we care about JavaScript. These days, and we talked about, I think I talked about this or mentioned this previously. We've seen our technologies come full circle, right? Web technologies are server technology. So we have we used to have very small amount of behavior sitting in the browser, that is on the client side, all of the heavy lifting happening on the server, right? Then that meant that we had issues like healthcare.gov, right? If your website is incredibly popular, you have to have the whole backside machinery for dealing with that. Okay? The alternative, which is what's happening now, is to do what are referred to as single-page apps. Basically, push off as much as you can back into the client. That is, have most of the code running, basically written in JavaScript, running on the client's machine, and possibly making a few calls back to various web APIs on the back end. So again, JavaScript is incredibly important technology these days, something that, you generally want to make sure you have a good handle on. All right, so before we get started, I'll just mention a couple of links. So I found this one actually over the weekend. This Mozilla wants to teach you web text for free, so they have kind of a whole little teaching and learning thing for various web technologies and all. It's pretty cool. The other one is also through Mozilla. That's the MDN network. Anybody familiar with MDN? One person, right? So MDN stands for the Mozilla Developer Network. Okay. And basically, it is the reference for all things JavaScript. Okay, so basically, if you're not sure how to do something in JavaScript, you need access to stuff that's built into JavaScript. Google whatever it is that you're looking for and MDN, and generally it'll direct you someplace in here. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of things. All right. So, first of all, as I said, the nice thing about doing JavaScript development, being a JavaScript developer, you pretty much already have the tools you need to do JavaScript development. That is that if you have a browser, you can always open up your browser. You can go here to the console link, and there it is. This is an interactive JavaScript console. Right, so I can type in arbitrary JavaScript expressions. I think I can make it bigger too. There we go. Yes. So I can type in arbitrary JavaScript expressions and have them evaluated on the fly. Okay. So we can do things like hello. Etc. Okay. So there's your JavaScript interpreter. The other thing that's actually really nice about this is since most of the time we're writing JavaScript code to interact with a web page, you can actually load up that particular web page and then try out JavaScript in terms of interacting with that particular web page. Okay, so we'll look at this kind of stuff as well. Questions so far? All right, so let's start playing around with some JavaScript here. Let me create a folder for our stuff today. All right, and let's get brackets open. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, and we'll go to the folder that we just created, which is that one. Good. Yeah. All right, let's just call this hello.js. So, here's our page. Real quick, just to... Okay, there it is. It's open in our browser. We can again, we can just open up our developer console to play around with these things. So, for instance, to access the web page itself, we can use the document object. Okay? And the document object, well, has a whole bunch of different properties and methods available. One of the paradigms that JavaScript supports is the object-oriented paradigm. Okay, so JavaScript is an object-oriented language. The other paradigm that it borrowed heavily from was the functional paradigm. Okay, and so we'll see some of those different things. So there are a number of ways of using JavaScript to grab onto or get a handle to content on your page. The one that I'm just going to use here, so I'm just going to use this query selector method. And basically what that does is it allows me to use a CSS style tag for searching for some particular content, right? So here I can say, oh, okay, grab me all the H1s on or actually query selector will grab me the first such element on the page. Right? And you'll notice it comes back, it says, oh, okay, here's the H1, right? It actually literally gave me a handle to that particular element, right? So notice too, if I mouse over this, you'll actually see it gets highlighted there. Okay. Now, one thing that can be a little annoying and can sometimes get in the way, especially for debugging, is some of the stuff that happens in terms of the interaction between brackets live preview and the page. So I mean, you'll notice, for instance, that here it actually has this thing, oh, data brackets ID 6, right? That I didn't write that code. There's no such thing there, right? But, you know, brackets basically, as we're doing our little live preview. The other part that we'll kind of see in a minute is if I have an error in my JavaScript and I'm using brackets live preview, it's kind of hard for it to figure out the correct line number and all that. So sometimes in that case, what you may just want to do is just open up the page directly in a browser and sorry, yes. Open it up directly in your browser and work with it from there, especially if you think that there's some errors going on and all of those kinds of things. Okay. All right. So notice I can get a hold of that and so forth, and then you can do things. So for instance, I can create a variable to refer to that particular thing. So I'm going to use let, and so I'll say, okay, let the variable h1 be, and then this does, So there is in the console here a history, so I can use the up and down arrow to go back through that, and so I could say, okay, the header is that thing, right? And notice it kind of comes back quizzically as undefined, but again, if I take a look at the value of the header variable, now I see, oh yeah, I do actually have access to that particular entity. Okay. And again, then you can kind of look at the various things that you can do with it. You can ask, does it have children, and all manner of different stuff. Okay. One of those that we scrolled back through, right, notice there's an inner HTML, inner text, right? So if I want to ultimately kind of change those things, right, I could say, okay, the inner text is equal to, whee, boom. And right there, that's the point of JavaScript. The point of JavaScript is that anything on the page is fair game. You can get a handle to it, you can change the values of things, you can add classes to various elements, you can remove classes from elements, change the styling, you can create brand new elements that aren't in the markup, etc. That's what JavaScript basically gives you. It gives you the ability to totally take over programmatically the page. Right. And so again, you notice I can go to inspect, right? And there's that. I can go to, let's see, make this a little. Right, so it shows me, yeah, that's still the H1, etc. And again, if I go back to, notice there's my actual code itself. I haven't changed the HTML file. However, I have changed the document that the browser is basically viewing for us. Okay, and if I reload it, notice I go back to our hello.js. Okay, questions about that much? Now, the variable part. So you'll notice before I did, when I created a variable, I did this. I said let, and then the variable name, and basically assigned the value. A couple of things about this. Okay, so depending on what languages that you may have dealt with before, this might be very weird. For instance, if you've dealt with languages like C and C++ exclusively, the first question that should come to mind is, what the hell is the type of header? It's not let. Let's not a type. Notice, there isn't a type. Right now, well, after I do this, it happens to refer to a node, but then there's nothing actually preventing me from doing this. Now it's a string. Now it's an array. Yeah. So JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. Okay? Basically, the type really isn't on the variable per se. It is on the particular element that that the variable refers to. Right? So initially we have a node, then we're referring to a string, then we're referring to an array, right, etc. The let keyword is actually new. So, a couple of notes about JavaScript. Who's heard of ECMAScript? What's ECMAScript?
It's the proper name that nobody uses.
Yeah, pretty much, right? So ECMAScript is sort of the official standard behind JavaScript. And so there's been a lot of work being done recently with ECMAScript 5 and now ECMAScript 6, and actually they're working on ECMAScript 7, in terms of updating JavaScript, the language. So let happens to be new, ECMAScript 6. Prior to that, what you would use is the keyword var, V-A-R. And you can still do it, although generally, for the most part, you're going to want to prefer let. There is a slight difference in terms of the meaning that I'll talk about another time, because talking about it here, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense. So generally speaking, though, you want to use let as opposed to var. Let is the new var. All right. Okay, so let's play around with some other stuff here. So now that we have JavaScript, we can actually start talking about, we can go back and start talking about another part of HTML that we didn't talk about before. And that is, for instance, things like this. Buttons. Forms. So there's our button. Says click me. Okay, why not? And nothing happens. Okay. Now, how do we get something to happen? You write some JavaScript. Exactly. JavaScript's all about behavior. So you want something to happen? Write some JavaScript. Okay, so let's attach some JavaScript to this button. And actually, I'll show you a number of different ways that you can do that. So one is that we can just do something like the following. I could have, I could say, I think it's on click and equal to, and then I could just do alert TEE. And yeah, that's probably right. And there it is. Okay. So basically all I've done here is I've inlined JavaScript directly into my HTML, right? So I've said, okay, when this button is clicked, here, run this particular JavaScript code. Okay, and so the alert function in JavaScript basically simply prints out, creates a modal dialog that prints some message for us, right, like so. Now, most of the time, that's not generally how we want stuff done, okay? More generally, we want to sort of separate out our JavaScript from our HTML. Okay, and there's a number of different sort of ways of separation that you can deal with. So, for instance, I could create a separate script. There. And then in here, I could, for instance, define a function that says clicked. And then I could actually do that. So I could say, all right, basically the same code that we had before, which is alerted. And then change this. To that. Right. So I could say, oh, okay, you know what? Call the clicked function whenever you're clicked. Okay, so again, right, and there it is. Now, realistically, that's not much better. I mean, yeah, I have a named function for it, and certainly if I was doing more than just a single action, like just displaying this prompt, yeah, it actually makes it a little bit easier in terms of readability and so forth. But beyond that, not hugely advantageous. Okay. So there's a couple of other ways that we can attach our JavaScript code to the various components in our page. Okay. So let me show you another one. What I could do instead take that out altogether. Okay. That is, ideally, what we would like to do is to keep our JavaScript and our markup separate from one another. Now, why might we want to do that? Well, there's a number of reasons. One, I mean, again, you kind of have to do that context switch as you read these and so forth. Two, it might come down to an issue of in your shop, you may have you may have someone who has a graphic arts background who's actually generating your markup for you. Perhaps using something like Dreamweaver to drag and drop things and so forth. So they're generating a whole bunch of HTML for you. They don't necessarily know JavaScript. Okay? So we can separate out who's responsible for different parts and so forth. Also makes it a little more modular as well. That is, keep all of the stuff related to the behavior sort of separate from the actual markup itself. Okay. I'll leave my function. So now that I've done that, basically I need to get a handle to the button. Now I could again use the good old document query the query selector to find the first button on the page. The problem is if I end up having multiple buttons, that's going to kind of get messy. Okay, so what we can do is we can simply provide a hook to be able to easily access that particular button, right? Click the button. It's an ID. Okay. Then I can use the getElementById method of the document object to grab that particular ID. So, right, click but was the ID, and then I have a handle directly on that. Okay. And again, you know, I'm doing a lot of coding here, and really I should sort of show this. So, for instance, okay, notice document getElementById. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Now, I want to stop here for a second, because here's the thing. Notice that I added an ID. What are the rules about IDs in HTML? Right, they should be unique on the page. Basically, there should only be a single element with that ID on the page. What you will notice a lot of times when people are trying to select elements from JavaScript is that they will give an element an ID, and they will select it pretty much the way that we've just done. The reason being that since an ID is unique, that means looking up that element on the page is incredibly fast. It's one of the fastest types of queries you can do from JavaScript. So doing the query by an ID is very fast. And again, we care about that because we only have a few seconds until the user decides to go elsewhere. Okay? So, generally speaking, a lot of times when you're going to select elements from an individual element from JavaScript, you're going to want to just add an ID to it, and that way you can get to it quick. Yeah?
Is there a difference between doing it by ID and doing it by name?
Yes, names aren't unique. So doing name selectors is slower. You could have names, and just like classes, but again, those are going to be slower searches because those don't have to be unique. Yeah. All right. So notice we can actually get hold of the button itself, which essentially is that code that we've done there. Okay, so once I have that, then I can say, okay, button, I want you to have your onClick function be the clicked function. And so again, if I reload this, voila. Now, something really profound happened there that I kind of snuck by you, and I suspect most of you didn't even quite think about what happened. So let me show you this again. Console.log is the way in JavaScript that you can have your JavaScript program automatically print something to the log. So for instance, if I just did notice, it just prints that. So if I create a function, hi, but let me show you this. Think about that for a minute. Set the variable greet to be this function. It's not set the variable greet to be the result of the function. It's literally set greet to have the value this function. What? Who the hell programs like that? Notice JavaScript's like, okay. What? Yeah, greet's a function. So I can do this. Mine's blown yet. If you haven't seen this before, yeah, it's really weird. Remember before how I mentioned JavaScript took from two paradigms, object-oriented and functional? This is the ugly functional side. Actually, it's not ugly, it's really cool. So, functional programming languages, the functional paradigm, functions are first-class entities. What the hell does that mean? They get to sit up front in the plane, they get drinks and them. What it means is that everywhere you would normally use variables and regular values, you can also use functions. So for instance, you can set a variable equal to a function. You can pass a function to another function as a parameter. What? You can have a function that returns as its result a function, which is weird. Okay. So a function that makes a function. It's weird stuff. So, notice, I can just pass along functions as values. And then, I can then use that function through that variable. Let me go back to here. That's what's happening there. What's happening there on line 18 is we're saying, oh, okay, make the function referred to by the onClick property of button now refer to our clicked function that we had separate, outside, happy, happy. Now the thing, yeah.
So in that case, if you put the parentheses, what is actually getting?
Right. So exactly. So if I meant set the value equal to the result of this, then I would have parentheses, right? So I could do something like function square n. Okay. So that's the squaring function. And so, which I can call, sort of, so I can do square of 4, that gives me 16, right? And then I could do things like I could say, oh, okay, let r equal the square of, let's say, 6, right? And so if we check the value r, yeah, it's 36, right? Because I had the parentheses in there. On the other hand, right, let's say I did something like this. Fn is the squaring function. Okay. Yes. Question? Yes.
On brackets, can you collapse those lines 17 and 18?
Where?
Without assigning a variable, but just calling it.
Over here? Yeah, technically I could. So, if I really wanted, I could actually have done, I could do this. I could say, okay, grab that whole thing, dot, on click, equal to, clicked. Yes.
It's just ugly, or?
Well, no, you can do that. That's fine. Sure. I just wanted to be explicit. And since we're going down that road, I could, in fact, do this. Let me just split this across 2 lines to make it a little Clicked is gone. OnClick does hold a function. What function? Well, I can't tell you because the function doesn't have a name. Again, what? Yeah, that function. See? Function. The name would go right here. Doing function in there. But there ain't one. But yeah, this still works. Is the room spinning yet?
Scalar support is an open parentheses with the arrow.
Yeah, right. That's another syntax. You're right. Okay. So, back to this, right? So this is an anonymous function. There's another word for that, by the way. It's Greek. Lambda. Yeah. Right? It's a lambda function. Okay. So named because the mathematician Alonzo Church, who developed this notion of applications of functions as a method of programming, created something called the lambda calculus. Okay. So this notion of a function without a name, oftentimes they are referred to as lambdas, lambda functions. In some languages, you actually have a keyword lambda to refer to them. And actually, there's sort of the new hotness these days. Lots of languages are adding them. The most recent version of Java, their big bump, they added lambda functions. The new C++ now has lambda functions. They're sort of the big thing in terms of a lot of programming languages. Okay. Now, again, sort of like that whole assignment thing, you know, why are we doing this? Why? If you take the step that functions are first class, that is, we can have variables that hold them, we can pass them into functions, we can return them from functions, etc. It's easy to get here. Because the idea is, especially for instance, if you're going to have functions that take functions as parameters. So if I have a function that I'm only ever going to use once to basically pass it to this other function, why bother giving it a name? Just create the function right there and be done with it. Then I don't have this extra function sitting in my namespace cluttering up everything, getting in the way. Okay? So that's the idea of an anonymous function. So I could do it this way as well. There is actually another there's another way of let's see, it's document, yeah, get element by element. Right, there's the add event listener method for assigning for basically adding an event listener, and then you can do things. So let's say, I think it's, if I remember right, I think it's click, and then whatever it is that you're adding. So it would be this here. Let's see if I'm right. Yep. Okay. So you give the particular function that you're providing, or the particular event that's going to happen that you want to listen for, and then the function that you want to have called whenever that event happens. Right. Notice add event listener is a higher order function. A higher order function is a function that takes another function as a parameter, right? In fact, this is a second order function. Right? It takes one, it's like sort of one level in. Okay. So that's yet another way of attaching that and so forth. Questions about that much? Yeah.
So the event listed, is that a predetermined event included, or?
Yes, right. I mean, right. So and then again, I mean, so the question kind of comes up, right? So if I do, for instance, MDN button events, right? And you know, so here's the button reference, right? And notice, so there's all the attributes, and at some point there's got to be clicking in focus. I've got notes now, so it's got to be here's event reference. So yeah, you can see here's all the various kinds of events that can happen in terms of different things. A few of them. All right, other issues, etc.
So is an event listener, is that really just a matter of style?
Is it?
Is it really?
Yeah, it is a matter of style. Some people kind of do seem to prefer this one as opposed to that, but honestly, it really is a stylistic issue. Other questions? Okay. All right. So one other quick thing, just to kind of show you dealing with scripts and all that. So you know, here I have the entire script inside my my HTML file. As you saw with Bootstrap, you can load external JavaScript files as well. Okay. And so generally, again, most of the time what you're going to see is that the JavaScript file is kept separately from the HTML file and then loaded in. So just so that we can kind of see this, let me go ahead and create that, right? So I'll call it hello.js.js this time. Right, so here's our JavaScript file. Then I can change all of this. Yep. And I think, yeah, there it is. So that's how we can load an external JavaScript. And then, of course, I can take my code here and throw that over into there. Oops. Yeah, that's... All right, how do I outdent? There it is. So now we have our JavaScript pulled out of the HTML itself, and so all our HTML file is left with basically is the HTML individually, right? And again, we can verify that yes, that nope, that's not it. Here it is. And there's that. Okay. So, still working. Haven't broken it yet. All right. Let's go further. The script tag, right? So last time we talked about the fact that one way of adding in your scripts is putting them down at the bottom right before the close of body. Okay. And that has been a standard for a while, although now we have a slightly different way of addressing this. Right. So there are two keywords you can use here. There's async and defer. And basically, they have to deal with sort of how and when the JavaScript can be processed, right? So the idea behind this is, if we put them totally at the end, then the issue is that we're not actually going to start loading the script until the entire page loads. Okay. Now the good thing was that, yeah, it does get your content up on the page quicker. But the bad thing is, if you're dealing with a small pipeline, if you have a low bandwidth, etc., you're going to have to kind of really wait for that whole thing to kind of come in and all of that. Generally, the browser is capable of downloading multiple files from a server at the same time. Okay? And so here now with our async and defer tags, we have the ability to say, hey, you know what? Go ahead and start downloading this right away. And as soon as you parse the content, then go ahead and deal with this. Defer basically pushes it sort of all the way to the end. Essentially saying, well, wait till you kind of set up everything else and so forth for doing that. I think I can get away with async here. Realistically, I'm on the same. Yeah. Okay. So another way of kind of addressing those things and dealing with that and so forth. All right. Good. Okay. So now that we have that, let's actually let's do something beyond just putting up an annoying dialogue. Let's actually have it sort of really truly manipulate the page somehow. So for instance, we do have our hello.js. Let's do something like this. So suppose that I have a style in here, and I don't know, let's say we're going to do, so I'll create a class dot. And then I'll just say, okay, so the color is going to be, I don't know, let's do green. How about that? Okay. So there I have a class called color that basically all it does is ensure that that the foreground color is green. Okay. Now notice, I'm not actually using that in my markup directly. Okay. Right. I don't have anything with a class of color. What I am going to do is instead of this, I can do the following. So I'll say, let's see. Get the click button, go to its list of classes, and add to that color. Question?
Can you have like multiple functions inside the click listener?
Can I have multiple functions inside the, well,
Or multiple listeners?
I think, you know what, we can try it here. Can't remember. And I think it might be, let's do this. So suppose I do, right. So there, I've added two of them. Can't remember if it actually works or not. Yeah, it didn't. Wait, did it? Yes. Right. I could do them both in that particular one if I wanted. There we are. Reload this. Well, that didn't work either. Oh, yeah, I know why. Didn't work because I'm setting the color of the click button, not what I actually wanted to do, which is to set it equal to do that for the header, which makes sure, let's see. there's that. Now let's go back and put in the other code. Yes, okay. Oh, now we got neither? Hmm? You're right. Thank you. All right. Yeah. Notice it did do both. Right. So this one, and when I close that, it actually went to the next one. Okay. So click the button. We end up changing the text, the color of the text on the page. Okay. And so you can do this in terms of visibility. You can basically change the have one thing appear and something else disappear, etc. Questions on that much? Okay. All right, let's look a little further. So HTML has a tag called form. And the form tag semantically designates a form, a place where you're going to have user input. So, for instance, we might have something like I could have an input that is a text type, right? So just so we kind of take a quick look at that. All right, and here I can enter in particular text. Now, a couple of things about this. You can use this, the placeholder tag, where I could say, for instance, something like that. Right. And so now you'll notice that inside there it says in this sort of light gray, basically whatever it is that I've typed, sort of indicating, oh yeah, you wanted me to enter my name, okay, Phil. And then when we type that, basically goes away. So the placeholder text, that's new HTML5 stuff. Additionally, HTML5 added the ability to do more client-side validation. Okay, so validating input can happen in two different places. We can do it on the client side, that is in the browser itself, or we can do it on the server. Okay. Now, the problem with doing it on the server is that basically what we have to do is wait for the content. We have to submit the code back to the server. The server sort of runs its thing, generates a response, sends that back to us. Okay. On the other hand, if we can do it on the client side, it's much more responsive. It doesn't take a whole nother call back to the server to actually make that happen. And in fact, I was just read yesterday actually, there was one study that found that filling out of online forms, the response rate jumped from 20% to over 40% when they used client-side validation, basically just because of the whole responsiveness side of things. Now, the bad news about it is, in reality, you usually have to do both. Why? Why? Yeah, so the thing is this. As soon as you set up server-side code to handle things like forms, because that's generally the way that forms are handled, you cannot assume that when information is sent to your server, that it was sent from your carefully crafted web page. It is trivial to write a program to send data to a web server. Right? And furthermore, there are browser add-ins that allow you to, before any form is submitted, look to see what data is going to be submitted and manipulate that. For instance, in Firefox, there's something called tamper data. And tamper data was used by hackers at one point because some web developers very stupidly did the following. They created an online order form, and the online order form computed basically what the price of, what the checkout price was going to be. It looked at how much the item was worth, how many you were buying, right? And then did all this nice computation on the client side. Again, speeds everything up, makes it nice and responsive for the user. That part's fine. But then they sent only the final purchase price to the server. So, some hackers figured this out. And then they ran tamper data, and they ordered their brand new iPhones. And they set the price to a penny a piece. Voila. Cheap iPhones. Okay? So, client-side validation, good. But you can't rely only on client-side validation. You have to do it on the server as well. So when we get to the server side, we'll talk about all of that. For instance, one of the most common forms of validation is this. Fields that are required. Right? So if I go over here and I reload this, right, if I just hit enter, it says, hey, you didn't enter any information. Right? So, oh, okay. Yeah. There. Now it's. Okay. So that's nice. It's built right into HTML5. You can simply tag an input as required, and you're good to go. Now, other kinds of other inputs that we can use. So I can say input. There is a type for getting numbers, and let me format this a little bit better. Okay, so notice here I have little spin buttons and so forth, but also here I'm like banging away on the keyboard and it's ignoring me. It's not even letting me type anything that isn't a number. So that's pretty cool, and then we can go on from there. Now you can further constrain the numbers. So for instance, yes. All right, there we go. And so now, you know, doing, so now, for instance, like, right, I can't do, or shouldn't be able to do 200, let's see. Where's the error? Did it load? Yes. Oh. Oh yeah, now because yes, I'm not submitting it yet. Let's right. So now that I have two, I do need some form of submission, a way of submitting. So that's easy enough. Says, yeah, no, you can't do that, right? And again, so you'll notice when now when I'm scrolling up, won't let me go any higher than that. And similarly, if I was down here, right, I can't go below 1. So the minimum and maximum are going to be enforced just by our markup. Let's do another one. HTML5, they actually did a lot in terms of form handling. So prior to HTML5, if you wanted somebody to enter in a date, typically you ended up resorting to some JavaScript library to have some form of date picker. These days, it's built in. Get it for free. Okay. Right, so we can select, and there it goes.
You do validation. It just has to be necessary.
I don't remember if there's tags directly with date to require between certain times, but there are some other things that we can do. Now, additionally, there are fields, for instance, for URLs, for emails. If none of those meet your goals, then there is a way of providing a regular expression validator as well. So you can basically say, here's roughly the pattern that I expect the data to follow, and then again, it will check against that for the input. So again, allowing that on the client side, and for the most part, not even having to deal with JavaScript to do it. Okay, so we have a lot of stuff built in at that level. Okay, that's it for today. Next time we'll kind of move on from here. Yeah, the code will be up. Oh, yeah. There's the code for date, but yeah, it will be up as well.